So, in the face of a global pandemic, companies and offices around the world have had to rethink the way they do business in order to keep their employees safe. Now, with me on the line now is Daphne Lee, who is an editor for the Newslands International. She's also the writer of an article called "Did Taiwan Miss the Boat to Change Its Work Culture?" Daphne, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Can you maybe give us a quick idea of some of the things that companies around the world have started to do in order to make working in this new pandemic possible?
When I was writing the article on Taiwan's work culture, I was researching on the US, and actually, I think about over 68% of knowledge workers are now working from home.
Wow.
Because of the lockdown. So unless you're an quote unquote essential worker, you don't have any need to go into the office. I think most of them have been working from home in the past few months. So that has been generally the trend around the world right now, except for Taiwan, I think.
So working remotely includes things like, what we're doing right now, having, teleconferencing, having video chats. Some people are having flexible work schedules where they come in on certain days of the week and not on other days of the week. What has your experience been here in Taiwan?
Before it turned into a pandemic, in January, February, we worked in the office. Even in March, when the imported cases were coming in, and then everyone was kind of like everyone in the office was paranoid already, right? And then if you have like a slight fever, if you're coughing, and then everyone in the office is really tense. And then we're always like, okay, like who in the office has it? Just tell us. But our company was still kind of like really slow in reacting and still thought, oh, everything is gonna be fine, whatever. And then just like the news reports kept coming in every day. And then one day, like one of the Fridays in March, and then our company decided to do a remote work drill for that one day to see how everything goes. It went okay. We had our meetings on Zoom, and then we did everything we normally do, because like literally none of our work requires physical presence unless you're in HR and you have to deal with some paperwork. Other than that, everyone can work from home. But still, I think the coordination was a bit off. Yeah.
What was the hardest thing about that?
The hardest thing was, I feel like, the meeting, because every morning we have news briefing. And once the work involves a group of people, then everything kind of starts to fall apart. Like, oh, like my mic is not working, and then my connection is bad. I'm like not really in a quiet environment. And then just like I mentioned in my article, people don't even know if they should turn on their camera. And then people who are not speaking but live next to like a really traffic heavy area, they just refuse to turn their microphone off when they're not speaking. So it was kind of a disaster. And then when we actually did 3 weeks of remote work, I feel like we didn't really resolve the issues in those 3 weeks. It was just still like an experiment. But even as we were experimenting, and then Taiwan was just like, oh, like we're kind of back to normal now, and then everyone goes back to the office, and that's it. That was just like a nightmare for us.
So do you think it was kind of a scenario where everybody just knew it was going to be temporary, so nobody really tried to fix the problems? Or was it just because it was so short, so we didn't have to fix the problem?
For my company, at least, the decision was made on a weekly basis, the work from home decision. So every week, we don't know if we're going back to the office next week. So we have to wait for Friday, and then Friday afternoon, maybe 7 p.m., they'll be like, okay, next week we're gonna do it again. And yeah, so every week we're like, okay, this might not be permanent. This is just temporary. And then actually some of my coworkers still went into the office just on separate days. We were split into teams, and then if you're in A team, you're not supposed to meet with B team like during off work hours. Because if God forbid someone gets sick, and then the entire company's down. So
do you think that maybe some of the reason for kind of the differences between the way that companies in Taiwan have handled it and maybe companies in other parts of the world have handled it Do you think some of that has to do with cultural differences, like office culture differences? Like, for example, do bosses here micromanage more or feel like they need to have more face time with employees? Maybe can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, this is not based on scientific research, but just my experience and talking to other Taiwanese people. Um, I do feel like trust is a big issue between employers and employees in Taiwan. Um, and it's just like if you want remote work to actually work out the way it should, actually your boss would have to place a lot of trust in you for completing your work independently. But I think that's not the case in Taiwan. A lot of employers actually feel the need to like monitor their employees. Like in my
Mm.
article, I mentioned my friend had to like dial in 3 times a day and like let his employer just watch him work for a few minutes. So that's really, yeah, that's odd.
Watch
But
him work? Like what was his job?
yeah, I think he works at a research center. But and then they also told him he can't work from a cafe because otherwise, how do we know you're working? So it's just like little things that don't really make sense logically, but they just have this like need to do it and to make themselves feel better. Yeah,
Mm.
but not everyone is like that. But I think most of the stories I've heard are pretty terrible.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that working remotely can actually help a company, not just the employees?
Well, the biggest benefit for a boss would be saving real estate costs. Like, let's say if you just have half of your team rotate, you can, like for us, we have 2 stories for office space. But actually, if we half of us are working from home, we only need one story, and
Mm.
then that's probably cuts the rent by half, and then and also maybe it doesn't apply to Taiwan, but like in the U.S., like Facebook announced remote work, and then Mark Zuckerberg said he would adjust the payroll for people who are not in the expensive cities. So
Mm.
that in a way also helps the company to reduce their payroll costs as well. Um, yeah, just a lot of logistical stuff that you don't need when you're not working physically in one space. Yeah, and then
Mm.
also this pandemic is a good example. Like if your employee is sick, but he or she can actually work from home, but they just can't kind of get to the office. Oh, it happens to me a lot in my office when my coworkers have diarrhea that day. And so they could still work technically, but they just can't really go into the office. But then if we don't have remote work as an option, then that employee has to take a sick day off. That means that's 1 day less of productivity. But
Mm.
if you as an employer can offer that as an option, then you avoid having like everyone to take sick leave or whatever.
Do you think that allowing workers to work remotely would also help Taiwan with its problem of brain drain, or with the problem of being unable to hire workers from overseas at a higher cost?
Yeah, so as I wrote in my article, I think as of 2018, 78% of Taiwanese employers have that talent shortage problem.
Mm.
And especially, I think tech talents in engineering or just something that's like data journalism or whatever, those talents are really hard to find in Taiwan. Um, but if you're not branching out and you're limiting everyone or working in Taipei or Hsinchu, then you as an employer, you're really limited to just a few talents in the pool. But if you can work with a remote team for some of your tasks, then you can branch out to, let's say, Southeast Asia or Singapore or Hong Kong. But then again, I think that would kind of be not feasible right now because I don't know exactly how the government regulations would work if you're hiring employees overseas. Because I know that might accrue 20% tax for contract workers. Yeah,
Oh.
so that's not very enticing for employees who want to keep it low cost. So that's
Mm.
something that the government has to change in the long run as well.
In your article, you mentioned that you thought maybe Taiwan missed a once in a generation opportunity to kind of restructure the office or workplace environment. Do you think that's true?
I think it is. I mean, at least for me. I mean, this pandemic, even it seems like it's really horrible, but you can see how a lot of companies around the world are trying to survive within these limitations. And then, like, even old school companies, like insurance companies, they're also working from home. They're also trying to get around that traditional mindset because they have to survive. But then in Taiwan, because we don't have that kind of pressure and everything is normal and fine, then it doesn't really press the button to force you to think about an alternative approach, right?
If you could give some advice to Taiwanese companies based on what you've observed in your personal experiences and the research you did about what's happening in other countries, what kind of advice would you give them for ways of adjusting the workplace environment moving forward?
Okay, like while other countries are already talking about how to refine remote work, like how to make it more seamless, like make it better and more efficient, in Taiwan, it's actually not even a conversation yet. Like the conversation is still stuck in wages, work hours, and like whatever like employee abuse. But remote work is like not even in the picture yet. So I feel like to start, some companies are offering a few days of remote work per month. But I think if you're already doing that, you might as well make it more flexible and don't set a day limit on it. Just have your employees take their work from home days whenever they need. And then I guess as an employer, you will also try to be less trying less to penalize your employees for not coming to the office because there's this like workplace pressure that you have to be present to show that you're doing your work. So it's also a lot of mentality changes. So I think start small and just change the way you're behaving around employees. And also like as an employee, if you feel like that's your right to do so, also like speak up to your bosses. Because I know a lot of my coworkers just like don't talk to my boss for anything. And then my boss actually thinks I have like a really bad attitude for being like too American or something. Yeah, but just like if you feel like something is not right, speak up. It's also the employee's responsibility to change the workplace culture as well.
Hopefully for Taiwan, where a lot of companies haven't really been forced to deal with it, they've at least had to experience enough of it so that they will have started these conversations and be able to kind of continue discussing them in the future.
I hope so. I mean, my article was translated into Chinese and it was posted on our Taiwanese website. And the comments were just, oh. So like a majority of the comments were saying, oh, like she just doesn't understand Taiwanese work culture. Even if we were gonna work remotely, it just means we're gonna work like 4 to 5 hours extra every day because our bosses are terrible. So that was like a general sentiment. And then there's like another layer to it that people just think remote work is not in Taiwan's culture. And they say you can enforce your American mentality onto Taiwanese people. But then I was like, okay. And then I had a talk with my coworkers about the comments, and they said, well, like, yeah, that's exactly the mentality that prevents Taiwan from making progress because they think other more progressive work models don't apply to this small island. And then so they're forever just like on that treadmill thinking, oh, okay, everything is going to stay the same, nothing's going to change. And then we're just going to sit here and complain. So those like were the comments I got the most from the Chinese version, and lots of attacks, but
Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that you were attacked for that.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Again, we've been talking with Daphne Lee, who is an editor for the News Lens International. I appreciate you talking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me here.